Playing scales is something that's considered foundational on basically every instrument. In fact, learning how to construct major scales is usually one of the first things that's taught in any music theory class. But it can often feel a bit abstract how these patterns we learn in theory class apply onto the guitar fretboard. And many guitarists don't really fully connect their knowledge of the theoretical concepts and apply that into real fretboard knowledge. So in this lesson, I want to look at how we can think of the major scale pattern in a way that's more idiomatic to the guitar, and look at how we can use one fingering to be able to play a major scale anywhere on the neck. If you do know a bit about playing scales, you might think I'm just talking about using this shape. And this is a very standard kind of stock major shape a lot of guitarists will use. There I'm playing G major. You can move that shape up somewhere and play A major or B major, for example. But one problem with thinking of the shape this way is a lot of students tell me they will feel kind of stuck in this box. So they can only play G major within this shape, and moving up they're kind of stuck. They can only play A major here. So what I want to show you is how you can get comfortably around anywhere on the neck within one key. And this trick will work with any key or with any mode of the major scale for that matter, where we're just going to have one single fingering pattern that will repeat everywhere up and down the neck. To understand how this works, we're going to need to look a little bit at how the major scale itself is constructed. So any type of scale is going to be built off of a pattern of whole steps and half steps. So on the guitar, a half step is a 1 fret distance, example 3rd fret to 4th fret. And a whole step is a 2 fret distance. So 3rd fret to the 5th fret would be a whole step. For a major scale, what you do is start on your tonic note, or the note the scale is named after. So for example, in G major, the tonic is G. And then you would proceed up from there with a pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And that'll get you the notes in the major scale. In theory classes, this is sometimes explained as being divided into 2 even segments a whole step apart. You can see we have 2 segments of whole, whole, half, with 1 whole step in the middle. On a keyboard, we can much more clearly see the symmetry of a major scale. If I play a C major scale and start here on C, I can go up a whole step, and a half step. This will be my first segment of the scale, played with fingers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I could slide up 1 whole step higher than the first segment, start from G, and again play whole step, half step, with the same fingering 1, 2, 3, 4. And we can very clearly see how the scale is divided into 2 even halves, and this is reflected in the physical way we play the keyboard with the fingering we use. The problem is that on the guitar, when we play scales, we can't really divide the scale into 2 even halves in terms of the fingering. So we'll generally have to play things with groups of 2 to 3 notes on a string. You can either play the scale by playing a couple of notes on a string and proceeding to the next string, playing another short grouping, or we can have a short segment and then slide up a couple of frets on the same string and then play the next segment like that. But we won't get quite the same even symmetry divided into halves. So to fit the scale into fragments that sit better on the fretboard, I'm going to propose splitting the scale into these groupings. We don't get the same obvious symmetry that splitting in half gets us, but these groupings are going to give us other advantages. For instance, each group can be played on a single string with a consistent fingering. So each whole half segment is fingered 1, 3, 4, and each half whole segment is fingered 1, 2, 4. There will be a whole step in between each grouping. That means I can start each new grouping by either moving up 2 frets on the same string, or by moving 1 string over. This works because when you're moving across the strings, between most of your strings there's a whole step distance. If I have my 4th finger on this string, and then I play 3 frets lower on the next string, that's a whole step distance. It's equivalent to going up 2 frets on the same string. So anytime we want to go to a new segment, I can just move to the next string and play the next segment in my pattern. This becomes an incredibly powerful way of looking at the scale when we understand how this interacts with the repetition of the major scale pattern. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to be showing a G major scale starting here in 2nd position, and I'll play each new segment of the scale on the next string. Playing the scale in 1 octave is going to take us up to G on the 4th string. But let's go ahead and extend this up to 2 octaves so we can start to see a pattern that's going to cover all the strings. A lot of the time when we're practicing scales, we just start and end on a tonic note, so I played G to G. But for this lesson, I'm really more concerned with kind of mapping out the territory of this scale. So let's go ahead and add in all of the notes that we can easily reach in a G major scale in this position. That means we're going to add this A on the 5th fret on our 1st string E, and this F sharp on the 2nd fret of our 6th string E. So we'll end up with this pattern. And here's where we'll start to see a recurring pattern emerge. If you look at how I'm fingering this, I have 2 segments of playing 1, 2, 4, 2 segments of playing 1, 3, 4, then 2 notes on this string, and then we're going to return to 1, 2, 4. Notice that the 2 E's are going to be the exact same fingering. We're actually starting here with the same notes that we played in this lower octave. We will now be beginning in the same place on this string. So the pattern is going to start repeating itself. From here we could continue up with the exact same fingering as before. And have 1, 2, 4. Keep moving on. Next segment would be 1, 2, 4. And this would keep going with 1, 3, 4 twice, and then the 2 note segment, and so on, repeating over and over again. This will work anywhere on the neck. Remember that to move to the next segment in the pattern, all I have to do is either slide up a whole step on one string or move across to the next string. So when I played that G major scale at the beginning, what I was doing was just moving the next segment would always be on the next string. We could mix this up now where I can kind of go anywhere on the neck by doing a combination of sliding up and moving across. So for example, I could start on segment 1 there on my 6th string. If I want to slide up this same string, I'm going to need to move a whole step above this note. So I'm going to take my 1st finger 2 frets above where I had my 4th finger. This puts me a whole step above, and now I can play segment 2. With the same fingering I played it down here. So I can play segment 1, slide up a whole step, play segment 2. I could keep going up one string like that, or I can now go across. If I go to the next string, I could play segment 3, play the segment 4 on the next string, and so on. Next I could do segment 5. I could either slide up a whole step and do it, or I could do it here on my next string. So all you have to do is just memorize the order of these segments and the fingering for each one, and you're set to just play this pattern anywhere on the neck. Now there is one last thing we have to understand to make this fully work, and that is that there's a different interval going from our G to our B string than between all of the others. So between most of the strings, you're going to have the interval of a perfect fourth, like E to A is a perfect fourth, A to D is a fourth, and so on. But from G to B, that's going to be a major third. So that's going to change some of the patterns, but it's not going to be as complicated as you might think. The difference between a perfect fourth and a major third is just that the third is 1/2 step smaller. So all we have to do when we're playing our pattern of the major scale, anytime we come to the segment on the B string, we're just going to have to adjust things up a 1/2 step. To get what I mean, I want to show you an abstracted version of this pattern. So this diagram is showing what the pattern will look like without any adjustments for the B string. And this pattern will be consistent all across the neck. When I was playing the scale here in second position, starting on second fret here, doing this pattern, up to here I was following the abstract exactly. This will all match up. But when I get to the B string, I'm going to have to make an adjustment and slide that one fret up. So notice that on the abstract pattern, segment 5 is starting at the same fret as segment 4. But to account for the B string interval, I'm going to shift that up one fret. And that's what got me the standard major scale fingering. Now this same principle will apply with whatever segment we happen to be on in the pattern when we get to the B and E strings. So for example, when I was playing up here in 7th position, notice that here in the pattern I'll be starting on segment 2, and in the abstract version here, these two 1, 2, 4 segments would be falling a fret higher than the 2-note segment preceding them. But since these are falling on the B and E strings, I'm just going to slide them up 1/2 step from the abstract pattern, and that would get me this fingering. So now we have everything we need to be able to use this pattern to play anywhere on the fretboard with any key we want. So all we'll need to know is the recurring pattern, the fingerings, and where our tonics are. Our tonics will be on segment 1 and segment 3. So in the case of G major, you can see that I can find a G here as the second note of segment 1, or as the third note of segment 3. With this in mind, you can construct a major scale by finding the tonic you want to use anywhere on the neck, and then using the repeating pattern to construct the major scale. So a really obvious one is the one we've been doing. If we just find a G on our 6th string, we can make this a segment 1 and play a G major scale using our pattern. But this could work anywhere on the neck. Say we find any G. Say I want to play in this position. Want to take this G at the 5th fret and make this my segment 1. Now I can just start here segment 1, go to segment 2 on the next string. Next I would go to segment 3, but adjust up 1 fret since I'm landing here on the B string. And I can keep going like that. When I run out of room there, I could shift up. Or at any point I can decide when I want to shift up. I just keep following the order of those segments. And as long as I know which segments are going to have the tonic, I could find any note and play any scale. So I could take a different scale. For example, say I want to play an A major. I could take any A. It could even be this one on the 10th fret of my B. Let's say I make this a segment 1. My pattern would start like this. And I could keep going up segment 3. And those would all be from the A major, but I can also work backwards. I'm running out of room pretty quickly there. So I would just want to find segment 5, since I'm going backwards. If segment 1 was on the B string, I'll find a segment 5 here and adjust it accordingly to account for where I'm crossing over the B and E strings. So I could have and all of that's just kind of taking into account where I am on the pattern. And there you go. With this system, you can play any major scale anywhere on the neck. There are, of course, other fingerings you can use, but I find this system is a really powerful frame of reference, just learning notes all over the neck and getting comfortable with what notes are going to be in each key. This is also a really handy way of memorizing fingerings for all of the different modes of the major scale, which is something I may cover in a future video. So I hope you found this lesson useful, and please let me know any questions you may have down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching.